At just 5 years old, I put together my first puzzle. I connected the pieces between my daddy being murdered, my mommy being scared and broken and immigrant, and school being the place where my trauma would become grounds for punishment. Grief still lingering in my nervous system, sometimes lying dormant in isolation, other times erupting in rage because there weren't enough stickers in the world to mend my family's broken heart. At the time, I had a teacher who chose to time me out into the corners of the room, safety pinning elementary citations on my back, instead of asking me what was wrong, instead of saying it would be okay, instead of teaching me tools to self-regulate. With so many choices, I couldn't understand why she chose to be punitive. And those citations guaranteed double the punishment at home. After all, back in my mother's land, the Afro-Indigenous Caribbean coast of Nicaragua was where her people were colonized by the Spanish and the British. And that violence found its way into classrooms long after the act, perpetuated by adults that unknowingly internalized generations upon generations of colonization. Perverting our existence with carceral logics and deficit lenses, because school violence surpassed borders and cultures, it was both global and timeless. And the normalcy of it all was what my spirit was determined to disrupt. You see, I was called to be a cycle breaker. Since before I was formed in my mother's womb, when I was dreamt of by ancestors that prayed for our collective liberation. Maybe that's why I got caught cutting 6th grade with my best friends. Our act of refusal and righteous rebellion, we were the girls of color who were always punished for choosing freedom, punished for resisting the policing of our bowels every time we would escape to the bathroom, punished for passing notes filled with Black and brown girl affirmations instead of reading books by white authors about stories that had nothing to do with us. Punished for not producing the worksheets before the bell rung, punished for not walking silently in line, punished for not rushing to devour the manufactured food in the little time we were allotted, punished for not freezing and dropping to the ground when the guards, yard duty, blew whistles after recess, punished for talking, for laughing, for playing, for hurting, for being. You see, we found ways to defy these policies that continued to criminalize us. And I didn't know it then, but I was a young abolitionist, melanated, marked as problem child because I dared to resist school compliance and I chose to practice joy and liberation instead. Failing to complete homework but never missing a single talent show rehearsal or step practice. Pretending to be sick to skip after-school intervention while sneaking off to learn about African diasporic stories and dances with Miss Moore, or learning Samoan traditional dance with my friend and her mom and her sisters, or recruiting all the homies to learn salsa, to perform for Dia de los Muertos celebrations, or writing poems about my experience, or reading books that I loved at the library. The fact is, I loved learning. I just hated schooling. And somewhere along the lines, when that little girl grew up, she decided to become a teacher, to heal that little child inside her and to teach little children just like her. And so I spent years getting hella degrees later, only to find that my younger self is still my greatest teacher. I still learn from her pain and from her anger. I still learn from her fear and from her courage. I still learn from her wisdom and from her joy. And so I did what my younger self told me to do. I began to search for other rebellious spirits committed to our liberation, and I realized that they were also searching for me in the field of education, and we created our own spaces to feel free, and we learned the difference between education and schooling, and we learned that taking care of ourselves and one another was key to organize and abolish the school-prison nexus that allows oppression to keep growing, and we learned that in so doing, would come our healing for our ancestors, for our family lineages, for our students yesterday, today, tomorrow, and the generations to come. Driven by the clarity that as long as children like us are in these schools, we have no choice but to heal, to dream, to create, to collectivize, to organize, and to commit to abolition. Because as Ruth Wilson Gilmore reminds us, if it takes a village to raise a child, it certainly takes a movement to undo an occupation. So let us move together. As I was preparing to speak to a room full of high school youth, I had to really tap in with my teenage self, and woo, did she have a lot to say. First of all, let me tell you that at this age, when I was your age, I had a low GPA, and because I got in trouble my junior year, I ended up having to serve juvenile probation, and I didn't even bother taking the SATs or applying for colleges. The fact is, I was hurting, I was grieving, and I was feeling really lost. And so when I asked my younger self what it is that she wished somebody could have and would have told her back then, she wanted me to remind all of us in this room that our pain matters. I can't tell you how many times I silenced my own suffering because my trauma from navigating adultism, racism, sexism, and classism made me believe that my pain didn't matter. But the truth is, we all deserve to feel seen and loved and heard and valued. Even when the society we live in and the systems we navigate tell us that only some people's pain matter, and that the pain of others on the margins doesn't matter enough or doesn't matter at all, I realize that abolition is about acknowledging, disrupting, healing, and repairing the historical and ongoing harm and punishment that this colonized society normalizes as common sense to social problems. And the more that I learned about the truth of our history, the more I began to understand the importance of context. Context helps us to identify root causes, conditions, and situations that explain why something happened or is the way that it is. And what I learned from Resmaa Menakem is that over time, somehow trauma gets decontextualized. And so trauma decontextualized in a person looks like just their personality. And trauma decontextualized in a family looks like just our family traits. And trauma decontextualized in a people looks like culture. And I would argue that trauma decontextualized in a school looks like education. The thing is, if we don't have context about the trauma that shapes the conditions that we experience today, when we decontextualize that harm, we run the risk of normalizing it as just the way things are and what it will always be. But Dr. Angela Davis reminds us that in order for us to create radical change, we must grasp things at the root. So how might understanding the root causes of our pain and other people's pain help us to uncover what needs to be abolished and what must be created in order to repair harm? What would it mean if we acknowledged how oppression has impacted all of us? Because the thing is, harm doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens on so many levels, and the root of it lies in systems of domination that were created by colonization. So let me break this down a bit for us. We were all born in a world that was shaped by oppression and colonization. So if you think about it as like rain clouds, you can think, racism, sexism, ableism, any kind of form of oppression that you can think of. It's in the air that we breathe. It's in the water that we drink or that we can't drink, right? And it rains down on us as social toxins. And what happens is that over time, those social toxins can create internalized oppression within us. And that's how we sometimes can psychologically ingrain things like self-hatred about our skin color, about who we are and where we come from. And when we do that, what happens is if we're not aware, it really hinders our ability to actually realize our spiritual, emotional, physical, and psychological well-being. And then what happens is that we also are in relationships with people who are also impacted by oppression. And the ways that we internalize that oppression sometimes get acted out in our relationships with our friends, with our frenemies, right? With our family members, with our classmates, because there's always a struggle for domination. There's always a struggle for trying to feel empowered when you know that you feel so disempowered, right? But then what happens is we're also navigating institutions, and these institutions also are impacted by oppression because they maintain and perpetuate it when those oppressive ideas end up showing up in the practices, the policies, and the values of that institution. That could be a school, that could be a church, that could be an organization, and that could even be our home. So it becomes this never-ending cycle of harm that keeps repeating itself over and over and over again until we can find the courage to break these cycles. And we can break cycles of harm and create new ways of being. So the theme of this TED Talk series is reinvent. For me, abolition and healing are about breaking cycles of harm and pain and reinventing new ways of being with ourselves, with each other, with the world, not reforming them. Because let us be clear that at one time we reformed slave catching to policing, and we reformed slavery to prison labor. So I'm not talking about reform. I'm talking about completely reinventing things that we need for our wellness, right? Abolition is about being in right relationship to people, to land, to resources, and to spirit. And so when we do that, then whatever we reinvent inevitably is rooted in love, in justice, in belonging, in interdependency, in care and liberation from any form of oppression or harm. But I don't want to romanticize cycle breaking, because the fact of the matter is when you choose to break cycles of harm, sometimes you lose friends. Sometimes you lose relationships. Sometimes you even lose some of your privilege. So I want to be honest that it's not easy. It's hard, it's scary, it's painful, but along the way I've learned that we can start really small by finding people that we can practice cycle breaking with. So I began to ask myself, who can I heal with? Who can I grieve with? But for real, who can I grieve with? Who can I resist with? Who can I rest with? Who can I practice accountability and repair with? Who can I practice joy with? Because practicing with others and finding communities of shared purpose is how we begin to break cycles on a personal level, on a relational level, and on a societal level. And I want to honor my dear friend who I just lost this summer, honorary brother Thomas Nikundiwe. I was blessed to co-facilitate a session with him right before he passed away. Because when we talked, we said, how can we organize this conference in a way that disrupts all the toxic ways of just pushing out work? And he said something that really changed me. He said, you know, there's a real opportunity in getting to practice what it is that we're trying to do in the world. We have certain ways of being, values and dreams for the world, our communities and our families, and we have a chance to practice that with folks. And if we don't, then it's just a lost opportunity for us to get better at what it is that we're trying to do in the world. He taught me that our liberation is rooted in the everyday decisions that we make in our relationships. And the fact of the matter is, we will fumble sometimes. We will encounter pain. But when we do, we can find ways to learn from harm. We can find ways to be accountable to one another. We can find ways to navigate that pain and hold each other through it. And while he may be gone physically, his spirit and his teachings are still alive and will continue to live on through me forever. And then I had to stop and think about all of the loved ones that I have lost in this world, including the ones that are buried in the cemetery right beside this building that we're in right now. Like my father, like my baby brother, like my grandmother, like so many friends and family that have left this world. The more that I think about the fact that we are all living legacies of the ancestors that came before us. And even though they are no longer here in physical form, their pain matters too, and still teaches us about healing cycles of harm too. And the pain that we feel when we lose people that we love forces us to reinvent ourselves, because we ain't got a choice. We will never be the same. And so I'm left with the choice to think about the fact that I too am a future ancestor. And I have to ask myself, what is the legacy that I want to leave in this world? And I also think about the freedom fighters that came before us too, which most of them were teenagers, just like y'all, and how they embodied transgenerational resilience that manifested in the coping and healing strategies that they used in order for them to navigate traumatic stress and pain in the ways that they sustained their own dignity and their culture and their spirituality despite the oppression that was passed down from generations of colonial violence. And then the more that I think about the social movements today, the more that I'm reminded that all social movements are birthed in pain. And they're informed by our stories, and they're grown through solidarity, and they evolve through our collective resistance and healing and freedom dreaming and freedom building. But they also evolve when we can be radically honest about the harm that we inevitably encounter even within these spaces and movements. But how we commit to repairing harm amongst ourselves, even as we fight these harmful systems, is so important to our collective liberation. We cannot afford to silence our pain. So again, I don't want to romanticize this work. It's been painful for me. And I'm sure it's been painful for many folks around the globe who are fighting for their freedom. But as Audre Lorde reminds us, pain is important. How we evade it, how we succumb to it, how we deal with it, and how we transcend it. So whatever your pain looks like today, please just remember that your pain matters. Even when it seems like it doesn't, chances are that there is someone else out there that is searching for you, wanting to heal with you, because they feel that pain too. They want to resist with you, and they want to create change with you too. And so as we continue to navigate the pain that many of us are carrying, as we continue to move through systems that harm us and harm our loved ones, may we remember always that while we may be wounded, we inspire others by our relentless pursuit to heal. That our healing and our hurting does not have to be a binary. We can be hurting and healing at the same time. And try to remember to make space for joy and for rest and for ease, because if we are constantly not at ease, we run the risk of manifesting dis-ease. And we deserve longevity. Our ancestors want us to thrive. So let us embrace the depth of our pain and allow it to teach us through the fullness of its range, right? And when we need to cry, let us release each tear with love and compassion. It will sometimes sting our wounds, but it also heals us. And remember that our pain becomes our power when our power is in our healing. Thank you.